When the twin suns vanished behind the black storm, and the surface cracked with frost, the Ishari creatures, older than human memory, sealed their ivory gates and vanished into hibernation, while Lieutenant Carter stood outside screaming into the wind, and watching his shelter crack open like an egg. The ice moved like a living thing, sliding over steel, ripping through supports, tearing his last contact relay out by the root, and hurling it into the darkness where even light could not survive. He was supposed to be gone by now, supposed to be aboard the extraction ship, supposed to be drinking recycled whiskey and complaining about alien food. Instead, he was alone, with nothing but a half-charged torch, a broken comm, and a suit rated for no more than -40, while the planet plunged into -200 and falling. The Ishari had warned him, they always warned him. They had said, when the suns fade, the breath of the gods will return, and only the chosen will sleep, and only the chosen will rise again. But humans never listened to riddles, especially not from six-limbed beasts who spoke through colors and sang with bone chimes. Carter had laughed when they spoke of the deep freeze. He had thought his tech would be enough. He had believed in human superiority, the way everyone back home did, the way they always did before the frost came. Now he ran his hands across the last broken panel of his outpost, whispering names into the wind, the names of his crew, the names of people who never made it off the surface, names swallowed by the snow and silence. The horizon had no sun, no moon, just the slow shimmer of auroras twisting like serpents above the ice fields, and when the wind howled, Carter could almost hear voices in it, not Ishari, not human, but something ancient. He wrapped himself in thermal blankets that barely held in any heat, and shoved protein bricks into his mouth, chewing ice and swallowing salt while his mind drifted to the fur, the dense, shimmering fur of the Ishari, who moved with elegance through blizzards, as if they were walking through a spring meadow. They had once shown him how they shed their fur in layers before sleeping, how the outer coats were hung like offerings around their great stone gates, how no predator would dare touch those furs because they smelled of dreams and death. He remembered the words of Elder Vesh, the Ishari matriarch, whose voice came like heat through frozen air. She had said, if you are not chosen, you must become what is feared, or you will not last a single cycle. Now Carter stared across the endless white at those gates half buried under drifts, and knew that no rescue would come, knew that the comms were gone, the satellites long dead, the orbit empty, and the frost growing teeth. So he started walking toward the gates, not because he believed he would be allowed inside, but because something inside him refused to lay down and die like the others. He would find warmth, or he would take it. The cold had no mercy, and Carter knew his blood would freeze in minutes if he stopped moving, but he kept walking, because the idea of stillness felt too much like death, and every step forward was a defiance against the dark that swallowed the world around him. He wrapped his fingers tighter around the bone handle of his toolkit, the last thing he managed to salvage from the ruins of his outpost, and stared ahead at the buried arch that marked the outer sanctum of the Ishari hibernation complex. Snow had already climbed halfway up the entrance, and the carved symbols that once glowed with soft light now lay dark and cold like everything else on this forsaken planet. He remembered when the Ishari would gather here to sing the fading sun, to sleep, their long bodies weaving between the stone pillars, their fur catching the dying light like strands of starlight. But now the air was too still, even the wind held its breath, and Carter could feel the deep pull of the frost whispering promises of rest, of quiet, of letting go. But he shook it off, forced his legs to keep moving, and made his way down the slope toward the hibernation gate, where the sacred furs were hung in twisted spirals, meant to guide the spirits of the sleepers. He knew what he was about to do was unholy to them, a violation worse than violence. But he also knew that the Ishari were gone, sealed behind stone walls and layers of biothermal insulation, their bodies slowed to a crawl, their minds adrift in dreams that would last decades, and none of them would wake to stop him. The fur was not like anything Carter had ever touched. It was alive in a way synthetic materials never were, thick and coiled and strangely warm even after days of exposure to the elements, and he felt a flicker of guilt as he reached out, but survival burned hotter than reverence, and guilt could not shield him from the ice. He chose one of the outermost furs, a spiraled mass hanging from a carved tusk, and cut it free with his carbon blade, the fibers resisting at first, then yielding with a sound like tearing silk, and as he worked the wind picked up around him, hissing through the stone like a warning. But he kept moving, fingers numb, eyes focused, chest heaving from the weight of the cold and the weight of the decision. Carter did not know how many furs he would need or how long they would last, but he knew he would not die begging for a rescue that would never come. He would craft warmth from the offerings of a sleeping race and become something the planet could not kill, something shaped by frost and fire and desperation. He turned from the gate with an armful of furs, and the silence followed him down the hill, not empty but watchful, as if the planet itself had taken notice of the one warm thing walking through its veins and was beginning to decide what it would do about him. Carter dragged the furs back to his shelter, his steps heavy in the soft snow that had begun to freeze beneath him, each movement taking more effort than the last. The sky was turning a bruised shade of purple, and the auroras above flickered like the aftershocks of a dying star, and with every breath the cold bit harder, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop now. Once inside the shelter, he stacked the furs in a corner beside the remains of his last fire pit, the weak flame from earlier still sputtering low in the corner. But even that was not enough. The air was already ice thick and bitter, and his body felt like it was moving in slow motion. He set to work, immediately slicing through the fur with quick, decisive motions, every cut precise. No hesitation. Not for the first time he wondered if the Ishari were truly as omnipotent as they believed. If they could see him now defiling their sacred fur, would they take offense? Would they wake and find him standing in the remains of their gods? But they were sleeping, were they not, locked away in their chambers, far beneath the ice, dreaming dreams that stretched far beyond his understanding. And he was just a man doing what men did when survival was on the line. He took the thickest of the furs and laid it across the floor of his shelter, turning it into a makeshift bed, the warmth of it seeping through the fabric and into his body like a soft tide, pulling him under just a little deeper. And for a moment he closed his eyes and let himself rest, let himself remember warmth. But the frost never let him fully rest, the bite of it creeping into his thoughts, dragging him back from the edge of exhaustion with a jolt of panic, and he forced himself back to work, cutting and stitching, weaving the furs into a crude sort of suit, not for fashion or comfort, but for survival. The first layer was the thickest fur wrapping around his torso, his arms. The second layer was lighter, more flexible, and would act as insulation against the raw cold. The final layer was patchwork, but durable, and it covered him completely. He used bones from a broken transmitter to carve needle-like shapes, and threaded them through the fabric with wire he found in the wreckage of the lander. The tools felt wrong in his hands, strange and foreign, like something he had never used. But necessity taught him to adapt and survive, or else. When the suit was finished, he pulled it on with a grunt, the fur enveloping him like a second skin, and for a fleeting moment he felt a sense of power, something primal, something alien to him. But instinctively he knew this was the path forward. This was what he had to become if he wanted to survive. The suit was heavy and awkward. It made him move slower, but it was warmer than anything he had worn since crashing on this cursed planet, and for the first time in days, he felt the weight of the cold lift just a little. Outside, the wind howled like a beast in the night, and the storm above churned violently, but Carter stood there in his new suit, staring into the horizon, and for a brief instant, he could have sworn the sky shifted a little brighter, and the planet beneath him gave a low hum, as if acknowledging his defiance. The suit was unlike anything Carter had ever worn before. It felt heavier than any human-made material, and yet it clung to him with a strange warmth that seeped into his bones, making him feel both more alive and more alien to himself than ever before. The wind howled around him outside, but within the suit he was cocooned in a quiet pocket of heat, and for the first time since his crash, Carter didn't feel like he was dying. He stepped out of the shelter, slowly testing the suit's strength, his movements awkward but deliberate. The thick fur moved with him, as though it were an extension of his own body. He could hear the crunch of ice underfoot, but it felt softer somehow, as if the suit had created its own bubble of protection, the ground beneath him no longer biting at his feet. Carter scanned the frozen wasteland before him. The ice field stretched as far as the eye could see, and the sky was a swirling mass of purple and black as the auroras flickered across the horizon. He knew the storm was still coming, that it would only get worse as the hours dragged on, but the suit seemed to shield him from it almost like a second skin, and the longer he wore it, the more he felt his mind sharpening, adapting to its presence. He took a deep breath. The air was cold, so cold that it seemed to freeze his lungs, but he was breathing more easily than before. The fabric of the suit wrapped tight around his chest, and he realized it was helping him to breathe deeper, slower, the strange fur working in ways his body could not understand. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was the immediate present. He had to keep moving or the cold would find him again, and this time it might not let go. As he walked, the landscape seemed to shift around him. The once oppressive silence now felt like something was watching him. Though he couldn't see anything through the storm, all he knew was that the deeper he went into the ice fields, the more alive the planet seemed to become. There was a pulse, a hum that came from beneath the ground, like the beating of a giant heart, and Carter couldn't help but feel like he was being drawn to it. He reached the edge of a ravine and stopped dead in his tracks, peering over the ledge into the darkness below. He could see movement, shadows shifting within the depths, but there was nothing human or Ishari down there. He knew that for sure. Still, the pull of the planet's pulse was undeniable. Carter looked around the ravine's edge, scanning the horizon for any signs of danger, but all he saw was a vast emptiness, broken only by the shifting shadows beneath him. He squinted, trying to make sense of the strange flickers of movement, when his gaze fell upon something that stopped his breath for a moment. It was a cave, an opening barely visible in the shifting ice, but there was something unmistakable about it. The entrance was shaped differently than the surrounding rocks, more angular, more deliberate. It looked like a door, a doorway carved into the world itself. His heart raced, and he couldn't help but move toward it, the suit's weight slowing him, but not enough to stop him completely. The further he walked, the stronger the pulse became, as though it were calling to him, urging him to uncover its secret, to step into the unknown. With each step closer, Carter could feel the air change. It wasn't as cold here, the temperature rising ever so slightly, as if the cave itself was offering him shelter, but something about the air felt off, like the stillness of a graveyard, like something ancient was buried beneath the ice, waiting to be awakened. He reached the entrance of the cave and stopped, his breath catching in his throat. The doorway loomed before him, dark and cold, the stone around it smooth and worn with time, but the markings etched into its surface were unlike anything Carter had ever seen. They weren't Ishari symbols, not human either, but something older, something far older. He touched the stone with trembling fingers and immediately felt a strange warmth coursing through him, almost like an electrical charge surging from the rock into his skin, and as he pulled his hand away, he swore he heard something beneath the ice, a low hum, almost like a voice calling him deeper into the heart of the world. He hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward into the cave, the air thick with mystery and ancient power, and as he passed through the threshold, he felt the weight of the storm lift from his shoulders, and for the first time since the crash, he felt like he might just find something here that could save him. The cave swallowed him whole, its walls close and smooth like a giant's ribs curved inward, as if protecting something deep within. Carter moved slowly, his breath visible in the air, but not freezing, his movements unhurried, as if the cave had a strange effect on time. Or perhaps it was the suit wrapped around him, keeping the chill at bay. He couldn't tell, but it didn't matter. The deeper he walked, the more he felt the pulse beneath his feet, stronger now, almost overwhelming, a rhythmic hum like a heartbeat vibrating through the stone and into his bones. It wasn't a sound, it was a presence, like the cave itself was alive and aware of his every step. He reached a narrow corridor that led deeper into the mountain, its walls glimmering faintly with an eerie blue light that seemed to pulse in time with the strange hum. And as Carter ventured further down the passage, the temperature shifted again. It became warmer, the air heavier, and filled with a scent that he couldn't quite place, a mixture of damp earth and something floral yet decayed. The walls around him began to change, the smooth stone now etched with intricate carvings, lines, and shapes he could not decipher, but they were not random. There was a pattern to them, a sequence that hinted at something far older than anything he could comprehend. His eyes darted from one symbol to the next, trying to make sense of the strange script, but they didn't seem to be a Sherry. They weren't even human. They were something more ancient and more dangerous. He stepped into a large chamber, the air thick with humidity, and the overwhelming sense of being watched. The walls were lined with strange bioluminescent plants that glowed softly, illuminating the space in an eerie green light. Carter's eyes adjusted quickly, scanning the room, his heart racing, his hand instinctively going to the weapon at his side, though he knew it was pointless against whatever lay ahead. In the center of the chamber was a massive stone pedestal, rising from the ground like a monolith covered in the same strange symbols he had seen on the walls. The pedestal was surrounded by more of the glowing plants and faintly pulsed with an inner light, as though it were the source of the hum that had guided him here. Carter approached cautiously, drawn to the pedestal by something he couldn't explain, his breath shallow as he moved closer, the air around him growing thick and oppressive, the warmth of the cave now stifling. But still he pressed on until he stood directly before the pedestal and gazed at the strange artifact that rested upon it. It was a stone orb, smooth and dark, with veins of glowing blue running through it. Its surface was covered in markings similar to the ones on the walls, but far more intricate in a way that suggested meaning beyond simple decoration. Carter reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing the surface of the orb, and the moment he made contact, a shock of energy shot through him like a jolt of electricity coursing through his body. He gasped, pulling his hand back, but the orb seemed to pulse again, as if it had recognized his touch, and was now responding to it. Carter could feel his body reacting to the energy, to the pull of it, and for a moment he thought he might pass out, but the sensation subsided as quickly as it had come, leaving only a faint hum in his bones. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening, what he had just touched, what was buried here deep beneath the ice. But before he could gather his thoughts, the air shifted once more, and he heard it faintly at first, like a whisper on the wind, a voice, or something like it echoing from the walls of the chamber. It was not a language he understood, but it was a command, something ancient that pulled at him, tugging at the very core of his being. He turned slowly, scanning the room, his heart pounding in his chest, but there was nothing, no movement, no sound except the faint hum of the orb and the pulse of energy that filled the space. And then it came again, louder, this time more insistent, the voice calling to him from the depths of the cave, from the heart of the planet itself. And Carter realized with a sudden clarity that he was not alone here. He never had been. The voice echoed again, louder this time, not just a whisper, but a low hum that seemed to reverberate in the very walls of the cave. It called to him like a song, a lullaby, ancient and haunting, and Carter's pulse quickened, his body frozen in place, but his mind racing. What was it? What was calling to him from the heart of the ice, from the depths of this forgotten world? He looked at the orb again, the glow pulsing now faster in time with the beat of his heart, as if it had found something in him, something it was trying to reach out to. The voice was louder now, almost intelligible, a soft murmur buried beneath the hum of the cave, and Carter couldn't help himself. He stepped closer to the pedestal, his fingers trembling as he reached for the orb once again. As his hand made contact this time, the energy surged through him stronger than before. It jolted his body, making him gasp as it flooded his senses, filling him with warmth that seemed to spread through his chest and then into his limbs, his head swimming with visions of distant stars, of long-lost civilizations, and an ocean of ice beneath him that stretched beyond the horizon. He could feel the voice again, now clearer, more distinct, as though it were speaking directly into his mind, words he didn't understand, but somehow knew their meaning, as if the knowledge had been imprinted on his soul in a past life, something old, ancient beyond measure. The warmth began to fade, the visions slipping away, leaving him with the sensation of something pressing against his skin, something that felt foreign and yet familiar, as if it had always been a part of him. Carter pulled his hand back again, his breath shallow, his heart hammering in his chest. But the cave did not let him go. It was pulling him deeper, its voice calling him into its heart, urging him to take the next step, urging him to claim what lay ahead. The warmth had faded, but the pulse remained beneath his feet, like the beating of the world itself, and he stood there on the edge of the pedestal, looking at the orb, as it glowed faintly in the dim light, still beckoning, still pulling him in. He looked around the chamber again, trying to make sense of it all. What was this place? What was he meant to do here? The voice called again, soft this time, almost like a whisper, but there was something about it now that made his skin crawl, something darker, a promise of what was to come. His gaze flicked to the walls, the symbols carved into the stone, now glowing faintly with a blue light. They were shifting, slowly changing form, as if the walls themselves were alive, watching him, waiting for him to make his next move. Carter stepped back, his mind clouded with doubt and confusion. He had come here seeking survival, but now he felt as if he were being drawn into something far greater, something that had waited for centuries beneath the ice, and he didn't know if he was ready for it, didn't know if he could survive whatever lay ahead. The hum of the cave was louder now, and the walls seemed to breathe in time with the beat of his heart, as if they were alive, as if the very planet was waiting for him to make a decision. With a steadying breath, Carter made up his mind. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. He couldn't leave, not yet, not when something was calling to him, not when something ancient and powerful had finally acknowledged his presence. He stepped forward again, this time with purpose, his hand reaching out to the orb once more, and as his fingers brushed its surface, the hum reached a crescendo, and everything around him shifted. The walls of the cave groaned as if awakening from a long slumber, and Carter felt the ground beneath him tremble. And then the world went black. The blackness swallowed him whole. The pulse of the cave faded as the light dimmed, and Carter felt weightless, suspended between nothing and something he couldn't comprehend, his body floating adrift in a sea of silence that felt colder than anything he had ever known, colder than the frozen wastelands outside, colder than death itself. He tried to move, but his limbs were heavy, as though they had been frozen in place, held by invisible hands. He couldn't see. His heart pounded in his chest, but the rhythm was distant, detached, as if it were no longer his own. The world around him was nothing but empty space, and an endless hum that never stopped, never ceased. Then a light flickered, a distant glow that seemed to pierce through the darkness, and Carter's eyes snapped open, his body jerking. As the ground rushed up to meet him, he gasped, and he was on his knees in the cave again, the orb still in his hand, its blue glow pulsing softly. But now the hum was gone, the strange pull was gone, replaced by a quiet stillness that pressed against his skin like the weight of 1,000 years. He stood up slowly, his body aching, but not from the cold this time. It was something deeper, something in his bones, something that had changed. He looked around the cave again, and it was different now. The walls were still lined with symbols, but now they shimmered faintly, as though they had been renewed, as if the very essence of the cave had shifted and breathed life into the stone itself. He felt it then, the presence that had been waiting for him, the ancient awareness that had been watching him all this time. It was no longer distant, it was here with him, right beside him, in the air, in the walls, in the ground beneath him. And then it spoke. The voice was no longer a whisper, it was not a hum, but words clear and resonant, and they echoed in his mind, as if they were his own thoughts, yet not his own at all. "You have come," it said. And Carter felt it ripple through his very core, a recognition, a knowing, as though the cave itself had found him, had waited for him to awaken. "You have claimed the pulse of this world, you are its keeper now." Carter shook his head, the words too much to process, his mind reeling from the weight of what he had just heard. Keeper, what did that mean? What was he supposed to do with this knowledge? What had he become? The voice did not answer directly, but he felt the answer flood into him, as if it had always been there, buried in the depths of his mind, waiting for the moment when he would accept it, when he would understand. The pulse beneath his feet had not stopped, it was still there, thrumming like a heartbeat, but now it felt different, it felt connected to him, as if he were part of it, part of the planet itself, and he could feel its power coursing through him. It was not just a hum, it was life. It was the pulse of the world, its breath, and its heartbeat. He took a step forward, and the ground beneath him shifted, responding to his movement, the stone groaning as though it were waking from a long slumber. "You are the bridge," the voice said again, and Carter felt the weight of those words, the path between the ice and the fire, between the forgotten and the remembered. He did not understand it, but he felt it now deep inside him, the truth of it resonating with something primal, something older than the stars themselves. He was not just a survivor, now he was something more, something bound to this world, to its pulse, to its heart. He turned back to the pedestal where the orb still glowed softly in the darkness. It seemed to be waiting for him to make the next move. But now he knew he was not just a visitor here. He was part of it, part of the ancient power that had long slumbered beneath the ice. And with that understanding came a new weight, a new responsibility. For the first time since his crash, Carter felt a strange peace settle over him. Not the peace of death, not the peace of surrender, but the peace of acceptance. He was not just surviving now, he was becoming something else, something intertwined with this world. And he knew that there was no going back. The ice would never be the same again.